Sunny Sharma, it's a pleasure to have you on A New Way of Being. How are you?
Hello, Simon. I'm very well. Hope you are too. Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure. I've been enjoying your content. I've been dipping in and out for a fair old time. And there's a few things I appreciate about you. Number one is how focused you are on self inquiry. You do the school of self inquiry because it's, for me, the most certainly one of the most, if not the most fascinating spiritual practice. So that's number one. And then number two is how you don't try and paint yourself as someone enlightened and awakened, but rather speak from your place walking the path, which I think is very refreshing. That's something I sort of try and do as well, not to claim to be some finished product and put yourself on a pedestal in that way, but no, I'm walking the path. And if you want to do, come with me.
Yeah, thank you for that. So my work on my channel and in my school is really focused on walking the spiritual path and focusing entirely on the practice component of it. Of course, theory plays a great part of it. We have to learn, we have to be instructed on what to do. Little conceptual learning about what you are, and but ultimately it's about really embodying that in day-to-day life. So all my work is focused on making the very abstract, subtle spiritual teachings as practical as possible on a day-to-day level. And the way I like to share that is through the lens of the seeker. um, as we are all together, just practicing, sharing our experience. I find that the easiest and the best way to go about it.
And I know you agree with this, that there are a lot of people, knowingly or not, who I feel can put themselves in that slight pedestal position of, I've got to this particular stage, maybe awakened, enlightened, those kind of things. And I do think it's refreshing to come at it from where we're trying to come at it from. And you mentioned before we started talking, it's easier.
It's much easier, yeah, to not make any claim of any understanding. And actually, it's just, as you said earlier, it's just honest. You know, if I had felt like I had achieved something, I would maybe claim it. But it's just, as you said, it's like as we're walking this path, it feels totally ordinary.
Mm.
And yeah, like it's much easier to just be an eternal student and constant. And actually, I think that is required, because when there is something within you that actually feels like you can claim something or some achievement, advancement, realization, like that's actually where we need to take a look. That is that pride which ultimately needs to get dissolved by the day-to-day walk of the practice. So yeah, it's just an easier way to go about it. And I think we have to show up to this practice every single day completely empty, open, empty of all learned knowledge, even the things we have actually realized, beyond the conceptual level. This this practice requires us to approach it in a fresh manner every single time we seek to practice.
And that doesn't, of course, mean that you haven't experienced and I haven't experienced a lot of benefit from walking this path because, just speaking for myself, it's definitely given my life a richness. It's given my life a depth and meaning, my relationships, my view of reality as a whole. So it does come with a lot of benefit and upsides, even if you're not making those grandiose claims.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on the as we discover our impersonal true nature more and more clearly, it makes way for vast changes in our personal expression.
Mm.
Because previously, our personal expression was rooted in ignorance, right? Which are like false ideas about what I essentially am, what life is, how the world works. As those beliefs are getting cleansed through meditation, our understanding of ourselves is becoming established in a more and more subtle place. A lot of those misunderstandings are falling away. It naturally changes thought patterns, emotional patterns, behavior patterns, preferences, ideas about what you think you want, in life, So yeah, I've totally gone through a whole huge personal transformation. I'm sure my family and friends would agree with that, throughout the past couple of years. But I do believe that, like, as we really genuinely start to become interested in self-realization, it's not even those personal changes that really matter the most to us. It's nice to experience those changes, and maybe some are pleasant, and some are, you experience greater harmony and peace on a day-to-day life. Yet it's still changeful. Therefore, it's not of ultimate importance, right? Like, I remember a teaching by Nisargadatta Maharaj. He said something along the lines of, like, anything that can happen to you on this path is of no value, and anything that the mind can want is of no value, because anything the mind can want will be a transient experience, which is not ultimately the goal of this journey. So we take it with a grain of salt. Enjoy the good, endure the bad. Know both are impermanent and not really what you seek.
Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah. Endure and enjoy without clinging. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, who has been the person, the author you mentioned, Nisargadatta, who has impacted you the most?
There have been many, and I consider them all my gurus in a way. But I would say the greatest influence has been the teachings of Ramana Maharshi. I was already on the spiritual path, but I think only when I discovered the teachings of Ramana Maharshi was like, I consider that to be like one of the biggest turning points in my life, because until then I was really focused about what I can do in the world,
Mm.
what I wanted, what I could achieve. Uh, Reading that book, Who Am I, which is like a little 15-page book on the teachings of Ramana Maharshi, it was the first time I realized, like, it was pointed out in there that, like, happiness is not due to any object of the world. And at that time, I had already started to realize that a little bit, So, like, when that teaching came, it was like very, very big for me, because I had started to, like, I got into the spiritual teachings through the teachings of empowerment and law of attraction, and, trying to heal my body, trying to achieve the life that I wanted. So, but I had started to see that, like, as I started to make progress in that and started to experience the things I wanted, achieve a little bit of the things I desired, there was no satisfaction in it. Like, every fulfilled desire would only lead to more of that, or desire for something else. So I never felt like uh, accomplished. I never felt safe. I never felt like, oh, this is it. And so, like, that's when the teaching of Ramana Maharshi came into my life, and it's like, the answer is not outside, you know. And also, that was the first time, like, I would say I recognized awareness of being, because, like, the entire focus was always outside. But that book, like, there's a pointer in there. There's like, there's something that you call I.
Mm.
There's this self that has never changed, that has been the same in every experience of yours. So that was like the first time I recognized, yeah, what is this self? Like, I do feel like the same self at all times. Like, even though, because I had been on the spiritual journey for, let's say, like 2-3 years, and I was like, I've experienced vast personal and life changes, but it's like, I feel like the same self. So it's like, what is this? So those are the teachings that initially really got me interested in self-inquiry. And yeah, so since then it's just been really focusing on these teachings. But, like, yeah, so Ramana Maharshi. Other than that, though, like, similar teachers like Nisargadatta Maharaj, Paramahansa Yogananda, I think he has amazing teachings on devotion. The Bhagavad Gita has been a great text that has had a lot of influence in my life. Ashtavakra Gita. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Lots of the classics. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think what you described there's so true. I remember very clearly being in a really idyllic place. It was Thailand, and I was on the beach. Everything was great. I had nothing I had to do. There was some hedonistic pleasure available, sun, sea, just enjoyment. And yet, in that moment, my mind was creating this, like, really unsatisfactory, unhappy experience for me. And there could be other times where I could be in somewhere that had no such upsides, obvious outward upsides, and yet I could feel completely different, and that insight definitely has come to me very strongly. Is that, of course, we need to meet our needs outside. We have to pay the bills, and there's lots to be enjoyed about life, but ultimately it's revealing in here. And you and I are both sports fans. You're cricket, I'm tennis, so both summer sports, right? And so over my shoulder, next to Nisargadatta's book, by the way, you can see my book. And it was a sort of mixture of sport and spirituality. And I argue that sport is quite revealing in this sense, in that the greatest performances happen through flow. And in flow, the small self is not present. The mind is
Right.
not present. Life is acting through the vessel of the athlete, let's say. And that experience is joyful, it inevitably, for the athlete, but also for the spectator. It's a wonderful thing. But then the mind comes on later and goes, I did that.
Yeah.
Right. And then we focus on the trophies. And so people think, for example, sport, and then by extension life, is about winning, trophies, accumulation, and so on and so forth, wondering why, when we get to the top of that mountain, it doesn't necessarily fulfill in the way we expect it to. Yet that experience of flow and losing ourselves is where the beauty is. Now, to
Right.
me, what I was trying to argue with that is that's extremely revealing, which I think points to what you've just been mentioning about.
Yeah. I wonder how athletes feel at the end of their career. Like when they look back, do they crave more or remember more like those winning moments, or do they remember like those moments where they were fully immersed in what they love doing, which is playing? So
Yeah.
I wonder how that would be.
Well, I've interviewed many of them, and it's interesting. A lot of them do look back on their greatest moments and think very quickly, yes, there was a bit of elation, and then very quickly it was like, what now, or is that it? As
Right.
opposed to, there's a guy who, Johnny Wilkinson, who had a very famous sporting moment for England in 20 odd years ago, and he told me it wasn't me doing it, and he noticed that very clearly. And then the dissatisfaction of the striving, right, hit him quite hard, but it did then sow a seed that then bloomed later. I think he's quite rare, but perhaps it's happening more. But it's certainly not an uncommon phenomenon.
Yeah. And I think the world of sport, it moves so fast where you see a lot of these, let's say like certain teams, or I'll just give the example of the Indian cricket team. For like the past decade or so, there was so much pressure building up because they were so good. They were dominating the sport, yet every single time there was a big tournament, they would get to the semis or they would get to the final and lose. So there was such a pressure building up of like needing to win a championship. And it's like, uh, last year, I believe it was last year, or maybe like a year or two ago, they actually won the World Cup, and it was like the biggest release, right? But literally, like it's done in a moment, and then they're already on to the next series
Yeah,
or next tournament. So it's like it moves so fast that it shows you sort of the nature of how our personal desires as well. Until you achieve it, that's like the only thing you care about, and
yeah,
you really think that like you cannot be happy until you achieve it. But the moment you do, you feel that great elation for some time, but it's so fleeting. And it's just now, the mind just now looking towards next. So
yeah,
it reminds me of a teaching by Nisargadatta Maharaj on this, which was very revealing to me when I started on this path. He said, desires fulfilled only leads to more desires. Like the fulfillment of desire does not lead to the end of desire or satisfaction. It only leads to more desire. So we can really start to observe ourselves throughout life and observe the nature of desire, where now you can, of course, like personally, living in the world, you still have to like desire still directs life, like the personal activities in some regard, but like now we can at least be less and less fooled by this assumption that my happiness rests in the fulfillment of this desire. We don't have to just wait. Like ultimately, fulfillment, peacefulness, happiness is here and now in the entire unfoldment of the journey.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. How do you? What's your take on then the balance between recognizing, the truth of what you've just pointed to, Nisargadatta's pointed to as well, of how desire works in that way, whilst at the same time having to still be able to afford to keep a roof over our head, family, etc., all that stuff. Now that's obviously more on the fear side, but what's your take on straddling those two?
yeah. On the personal level, there's a certain role that we are playing. You have certain preferences, things you like to do, work you like to do, along with certain responsibilities, people you have to provide for, certain things you have to manage, bills you have to pay. So we have to play that role well with care. We work, we work hard, we do what we can, yet without attachment to the outcome it must lead to. This teaching, even the subtler teachings of non-doership, I'm not the doer, surrender, which is something I greatly focus on in my work. Surrender equal as much as self-inquiry, because it's ultimately the same. It does not mean refraining from action or doing less. If doing less is your personal nature, like that's going to happen. But like ultimately, we have to handle all responsibilities and do everything and do our work with care. The part where we are working on is letting go of attachment to a certain outcome that must happen or must not happen. That is where our bondage lies,
Hmm.
where we do our work and we are totally surrendered to the unknown and totally willing to face what comes. So that's where we can grow in the practice of this teaching and awareness of our true nature.
And that surrender or that non-attachment, so you really give yourself to something without attaching to the end result. In my experience, and I'm actually thinking of sport again here, but without going down that rabbit hole, in my experience, when you're able to do that, it does have a different texture to it, a different feel to it, where you're enjoying something for its own sake, as opposed to striving towards something that may or may not happen in future.
Yeah. This whole theme was very subtle and confusing for me, because I always understood self-inquiry like very simply, but like merging that, merging meditation and non-attachment into day-to-day life was very difficult for me. And that's when I encountered the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, which, a lot of the Bhagavad Gita is all about making action your spiritual practice. So, previously it was like my spiritual side, my spiritual life, and like, okay, my personal life. And my personal life was still about like what I can do in the world. How can I have this experience or that experience? How can I make sure I'm secure and I can pay the bills or whatever? And then I have my spiritual work. Well, in the Gita, like for the first time, I encountered like, hey, no, you have to merge the two, right? Like, and your action is not really about, oh, what I will do in the world. Like superficially, it is so, right? Like, um, you're going to work for some wages. You're doing certain things so you could pay the bills superficially. So on the surface, that's what the story is. But actually, our action itself can become a path for self purification when we act in the world with attachment to what must happen. When we're constantly just our entire life force is just going towards trying to create some event in the future, then that action binds us. It further binds us to the feeling that this world is real, this is the ultimate reality, and that I am a person in it. Whereas when we use our action for the sake of self purification, in the Gita, Krishna says, like, make action, the goal of action is self realization. So it's like when we make our action and we into like our bigger goal, on the surface level, yeah, I'm working for wages or this or that or helping these people that I'm serving. But ultimately, it is my practice, my spiritual practice. So as I work without attachment, as I surrender to the unknown rather than constantly be anxious about it and trying to manipulate and control outcomes and people. Now, that type of work actually frees me from that bondage of ignorance. It further helps us to see the illusory nature of what we call the world, the transient, impermanent nature. And it helps us to see what I am beyond just this person. Because, like being a person, what does that entail? It entails constant thinking about me and my life, being engaged in just ideas about my desires, my fears. So like being needy, resenting, being angry, momentarily being happy, this and that. So that's how we are used to being. Like we are practicing being a person always. The teaching, well, and what we call the practice of the teaching, is really just learning to be as the self is. The self is non attached, totally allowing, open, empty, impersonal, without preference, without judgment. So it's like we're learning to now practice being as the self is. So yeah, like it's difficult to merge the two, but day by day, the practice is totally possible.
Mm. Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think I just want to dwell on this for a little bit because
Yeah.
we can talk about self-inquiry and, those key questions, who am I, and variations on that and where that can lead. But I think what you've just introduced here it will be a bit of a wake-up call possibly to some people watching or listening. So how have you cultivated this? Because it's easier to say this, and I know this from my own experience, is to let go and that kind of thing. But at the same time, the mind is, it's got tenacity to it, in terms of this capacity to go forward and back. So cultivating what you've just spoke of there, using our work and life more broadly as a way to self-realization. How's that been for you?
Yeah, just looking at my work as a as a method of self purification, right? So like, of course, I have my meditation practice and whatnot, but it's like then I don't go show up to work and think like, okay, now this is separate. Previously, like my work was about like, oh, I want to even like this personal desire to, oh, I want to help others, or I want to guide others in this understanding. Now I see even that's also just like superficial, surface level personal desire. Like that's what, yeah, I am doing that with my work, hopefully, but like ultimately now I simply try to be as authentic as I can in terms of like what I want to share, the message I want to share, and how I want to share it. I try, to relate that in videos. Every single time I try to make a video, I try to be fully there. Let's say right now we're doing a talk, I try to be fully here. Like this is the only thing that matters. Giving myself over to this moment, not needing, let's say, you to perceive me in any particular type of way, or not needing this interview to reach this many people or that many people, right? Like that, those are things that are completely out of our control. All we can do is here, like just really give ourselves over to this moment and let the words flow. Not even necessarily, when I started doing these talks, I would notice every time I would speak, I would like try to make my speech helpful or profound or whatever. And I started to, through self observation, started to notice even the authenticity of that. So it's
Mm.
like when you notice that, like I just try to let that go, and then it frees up the expression, and then it flows however it's meant to. Just day by day doing that work, right? Like anybody I'm speaking to, just like being fully there. On the personal level, of course, like there are certain like work goals or like certain things you are trying to accomplish or certain inspirations you feel. So I try to follow those, but I continue to just observe myself, and again come back to a place where I don't need anything to happen from that. I'm open to how that may go.
Mm.
um, just observing again and again the attachment, aversion, self, like insecurity in the
Mm.
mind, all it arising, and just constantly returning back to that place where n- none of those things exist. That which sees all of those things arising and passing. So yeah, I would say like day by day, just working in that manner.
Mm. And just to take the example, for example, of YouTube videos, I know from watching some of your stuff that you're by nature quite a driven person. When you do something, you throw yourself into it. You I know you were leader of clubs and whatever else at college, and so I imagine you had a slight perfectionist streak. I don't know, but maybe there was an element of that, right? And when it comes to videos or any of these things, if we have that adds a layer of pressure then. So by doing what you've just described, observing yourself in this way, noticing that inauthenticity or the desire for a particular outcome or the desire to be perceived in a certain way, and observing that and gradually letting that go, how has that then impacted your experience of making the videos and indeed how they have been received?
Yeah, just the word like flow and authenticity, I would say, like a freedom of expression. I think when we are trying to meet a certain image, trying to create a certain outcome, our energy is restricted in a particular way. I always felt that was like a putting chains on my expression. When it's so polluted with fear and desire. That's what actually doing these talks really taught me. It's like, uh, although in the talks I am quote unquote teaching, but actually it has been such a great learning experience for me. Whereas like doing these talks really helped me to understand non-doership, really
Mm.
helped me to understand like what authenticity really means, what it means to really give yourself over to the experience, even though the mind is so afraid of like what may happen, even though
Mm.
the mind so wants to control speech, action, and other people's perception. So yeah, I would just say like a freedom of expression. It's our expression totally like freed up to dance however it is meant to.
Mm. Yeah. I'll just share an experience of mine briefly. So one of the avenues that I do for work is talks, particularly off the back of my book, talking about flow, actually. And oftentimes I will be well prepared. And there was one time I did a talk for a group, and for various reasons, I went and I had n- no idea what I was going to say. I remember being in the room waiting to come on. And as I was walking to my chair, I thought, I'm going to sit down. I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth. And I spoke for half an hour, and it was helpful because the audience was quite close to me, so I could interact and I could connect with them. But it ended up being one of, if not the most impactful talk I've ever done.
Wow.
And I ended up going on a tour of America. I went to Texas and spoke at various businesses and sports teams off the back of that. And when I
Wow.
went to do those talks, I was more prepared because I think people, when they're bringing you over, they want that.
Right.
But it wasn't, in truth, as impactful as the time I sat down, as you would say, completely empty and just opened. And I
Yeah.
was as surprised to some degree, I mean, as what came out of my mouth as others were. But the impact of that was that much more profound. And that was really instructive to me.
Yeah, yeah. And in this way, our personal journey is this, as you said, right? Like we have these insights through our day-to-day experiences with work, with relationships, with family. So I think that's the necessary attitude for an earnest spiritual seeker, where we really have to like just start to observe these things, revealing themselves throughout our entire day-to-day life. But yeah, like I agree, like whether it's with doing talks, presentations, or any sort of day-to-day work, of course personally being prepared, there's nothing wrong with that, but I do think we have to embrace the um notion of like spontaneity, and
Yeah.
that like that creativity dances so much more freely and with greater impact, with greater power, when it is authentic, when it is spontaneous.
Yeah.
And
That's
for
what I
that,
love,
we have to
actually.
give ourselves over to the moment.
Yeah, that's what I love
Um,
about coaching is
yeah.
all you can do is show up and be present and listen from that space of emptiness. And in my experience, discern between the ego that's rushing to give an answer and the
Yeah.
deeper insight where and you learn to tune into, okay, now this is I'm going to take a risk, let's say, in sharing this and see how it lands. I love that. And podcast conversations like this. Of
Right.
course, I will think about, okay, there's a couple of subjects I want to do, but I prepare far less than I did many years
Right.
ago
Right. Right.
because, as you use the word there, it's the dance and the beauty of the
Yeah.
spontaneity that arises when you open and allow yourself in that way.
Yeah. And I've done like certain talks for my school where, after that talk, let's say a certain talk, my mind would go, oh, that wasn't really that good. And I don't think it was helpful today. But I may, like, it has happened on multiple occasions where I'll receive a message after doing a talk like that. And someone will say, oh my God, like, thank you for that. That was really, really helpful. And then there are other times where I'm like, oh, this was an amazing session. Whereas like afterwards, no feedback, or like maybe it didn't impact other people that much. So I just started to see how limited my own judgment
Mm.
of what I'm doing and how it is perceived is. And it's also like now we can just allow ourselves to act, let speech happen, let action happen, and not take that judgment so seriously. The judgment and the judger who wants to control. Like we can objectify both, see them both as perceived objects, not me, and therefore not needing them to, like be like their its desire to be fulfilled. So not taking it so seriously, and then just right being free with our expression.
A quote I know that you're fond of is a rigorous refusal to harbor thoughts, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're speaking to here is observing the mind leap from I want this, or what if this happens, or that was bad, good, etc. And just noticing how inaccurate and off the mark it consistently is, and how it can lead you astray. But I did just want to ask a brief practical question. So if someone's listening going, okay, I am very attached to outcomes, to trying to control, maybe I've got a 5-year plan person, nothing wrong with that at all. Um, and but really being attached to outcomes in particular, and they're not as familiar as we're talking here, what advice would you give them to just at least start the process and taste a bit of what we're talking about?
First would be self-observation, because ultimately no one needs to convince you of these of to like practice these teachings, or you don't need to believe that like these are necessarily like true and there's this way of going about life is better. But we just observe our current way of going about life and see if it's creating more suffering or if it's bringing peace. I always say like, yeah, we observe within ourselves what sort of approach, what belief, what behavior brings suffering, more restlessness, unfulfillment, and what brings peace, clarity, wisdom, unconditional happiness, contentment. And then we just have to sort of discern and choose what creates peace, because we can feel that like what creates peace is like, I always like to say that peace is the fragrance of truth. It's the fragrance of God. So through self-observation, we can just follow that peace, because, even the things you want to control about life and the outcomes you want to arrive at 5 years later or whatever, you only want that because you want peace. You
Mm.
want to be fulfilled. You want to be happy. So once you see that even all of your worldly desires are about creating that peace, achieving that fulfillment, then that's your main thing.
Yeah.
So in day-to-day life, if you're just seeing that what is creating that peace and what isn't, then it's just, then at that point it's no one needs to convince you. It's just the obvious choice. So
Yeah.
that's how it was for me. Like, of course, for me, I do think like I also had greater faith in these teachings when they were arising. So that was a blessing. But at the same time, even that those things that didn't resonate or I didn't understand fully at first, like I just started to practice this self observation, and I think self observation reveals these like how you need to act, what you should really invest your time, energy, sense of reality into.
Yeah. So getting clear on it's not the house, the job, the money, the relationship we want. It's what we believe that will give us, and then questioning whether or not, as we touched on earlier, outcomes actually do that thing, or questioning the source of what we want, the peace and the happiness. And rather than it being out there, recognizing that it's where we're looking from in a nutshell.
Yeah, like you said, and that like when you said you were on the beach in like Thailand, yeah, like the mind was still restless, like you're on like, that's just we just have to start observing that about ourselves. Like whenever we get whatever we want, whenever we get what we want, we are so unhappy.
Yeah.
When we are seemingly at a circumstance or a place, or let's say on vacation, where there are no um, immediate dangers or nothing, no problems, we are still afraid of the unknown. We are still restless. We are still thinking about something other than what's here and present, right? So I had a similar moment. Like when one time I was on in a beach in Puerto Rico, and I was in the like it was a really secluded beach spot. So it was like literally it felt like paradise, right? It was blue waters, and me and my girlfriend at the time, who was now my wife, we were just there alone, had a whole beach to ourselves, and it's like perfect blue waters, everything like what you would want. But it's like my mind is somewhere else.
Mm.
Just observing that, I'm like, okay, there's got to be something else to this. So yeah, just
Yeah.
self-observation, it really brings all things to light.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Um,
Also
you
daily
mentioned,
meditation. Sorry, just one last point. It's like I just feel that just learning to sit in silence every day, if one really is wishing to grow in this clarity and is interested in the teachings, but we feel like maybe stuck sometimes, or we just need to start devoting ourselves to sitting in silence every day.
okay.
And that there's a power in that silence that will overtake your entire mental complexity and dysfunctional behaviors and whatnot. It will bring to light all of those things and start to like that presence within starts to engulf the entire dysfunction of mind. So I have a great emphasis in my work on the daily sit down meditation practice. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I want to come back to meditation and different types, and then leading into self inquiry in a second. But just to finish on, life and spirituality merged. And I know you were relatively recently married, and I'm very fortunate in that my wife and I, in slightly different ways, but approach this together. Like
Yeah, I
she's
saw your guys' video. It was pretty cool, like that you both are practicing this path together. I think that's one of the greatest like blessings.
yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate that. No, and slightly yin and yang. I am very interested in it. I think initially, and possibly still, from a philosophical point of view, that becomes experiential when you notice, hang on, there's something aware of my thoughts, and then it's the same that's aware of my sounds and sights, and where is that? And we can get into that. Whereas in fact, I'll tell you a quick story, and maybe you saw this in the video, is on our very first date, I started talking to my wife about non-duality, and she was humoring me, I think. And anyway, and she kind of got used to that over time. And then our daughter was born, and she had an experience of astral projection, which is just a name, but she basically left her body, and she came rushing into the room because I was in the spare room at the time, and and she said, "You'll never believe what happened," and I knew immediately that that's what she'd had, um, and and it was interesting because she said, "I've experienced what you've talked to me about, very directly."
Wow.
She was the room, and then a localized point with it. But we're very lucky. But I digress. But my point being as well, I think I was speaking to a guy I was doing some coaching with recently, and he was very committed to meditation, and he would go into his cushion, and that was his spiritual work. And then he would come and spend time with his wife, and that wasn't so much that. And I sort of introduced the idea of no, and I've heard you touch on this, is that no, that's where the real rubber meets the road, particularly I think relationships, and then throw kids in as well. But I mean,
Yeah.
all of life actually, but particularly I think relationships, because I've heard you say, yeah, of course, it's the good stuff, the happiness, the companionship, the love, the romance, the laughs, but as well, in my experience, you inevitably are going to push your buttons, and
Yeah.
patterns are going to come to the surface, and it's what you do with that. And I was very committed. We were very committed from an early time to to lean into those patterns and recognize them for what they are, rather than getting stuck, and then
Yeah.
which can lead to resentment when you just start that old thing of I've got my finger pointing at my partner, and you don't notice the three fingers pointing back at yourself. And yeah, relationships as spiritual practice as well as life more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I look at my wife as like my the greatest guru I didn't ask for. Because you that's not the form you want your guru to appear in. Now, like as a spiritual seeker, you always want your guru to be like in the flesh, some really wise being teaching you things, just like giving you instruction that you just immediately get and then you live that. But that's really not how the inner guru often manifests in our life. Guru manifests as our partners, our children, our parents, our problems, our inconveniences. So I do believe that like our romantic relationships, I think, are the greatest mirrors, and I think if we can look at them as spiritual practice more than we can look at them as like, oh, how can I get my personal needs fulfilled from this, or like what is my ideal relationship, like what do I want in a person, the better, right? Because our desires for what we want our relationship to be only pollutes it. Because I can definitely say that like I never thought I would have the marriage that I do today. Like I always had a different idea of marriage. And if I had cling to that idea, like I would have never allowed the relationship to flower in this way that it has.
Yeah,
And also like, yeah, if you look at it as your spiritual practice, then it offers us so many opportunities to embody this knowledge. And it's unfair at times, especially if like you're the only person in your relationship that practices, right? Because I hear it all the time, like my partner doesn't practice this and that. In a way, we don't choose who life chooses for us. So it's like, rather than like only desiring a partner that does practice or is on the path, like I think we should look at our whoever we are with as like our spiritual practice and see what we can learn, how we can grow through this relationship, rather than like how can we change the other person or what can I get from this relationship. Such a more fulfilling way of going about it.
completely agree. Yeah, beautifully said. There's that Eckhart Tolle quote of, if we stop expecting relationships to make us happy, but understand they're here to make us conscious, they become a
Yeah.
wonderful self-mastery tool. And yeah, as you say, embracing that, really embracing that, does give a relationship a depth that, yeah, is can always deepen and grow.
So you both practice together?
We practice in different ways. Just over here, she's got a Tibetan gong that always slightly vibrates when I talk. She does Vedic meditation, and I tried doing Vedic, but I found it a little bit heady for me. But she has, her body disappears. She experiences her head outside the room. So this is what I mean. She's very energetic, and she's a Reiki master as well. And
Okay.
so when she's given me treatments that have been incredibly profound. Like there was one time my nervous system was a bit revved, so she laid me down, and it was like a psychedelic experience. Perhaps not quite as intense, but it was, and it was incredibly profound. So yeah, hers is more energetic,
Got
whereas
it.
I think mine's more really noticing the presence of awareness.
Yeah.
That's what I come back to. So mine's probably more traditionally non-dual in that
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
I mean, they're both non-dual, but hers is more, yeah, energetic. Head and heart, which I
Yes.
think is quite a nice mix. Does
Do
your
you
wife is your wife interested?
So initially she was, because I remember when we had just started dating, like she of course saw the work that I was doing. In my personal life, I don't really talk about any of these things, but like, of course, when let's say friends and family see the work that I'm doing, they're a little interested. So when we had just started dating, she was interested, and we even used to had started like meditating together at that time. She was growing interested, but I felt so she has a Christian background. Uh, and I often feel with sometimes with Christian background there can be um, sometimes a little stuckness, So when it started really deepening for her, there was a fear of like what God is or what God isn't, So now she practices Christianity in her own way. We do have this little book of like it's a book called Jesus Talks, and it's like a simple daily teaching every single day that we do read together in the morning. Other than that, we don't really share. Like we have our paths separately. Hers is more like religion based. Mine is, of course, as you know, like in these teachings. But yeah, like every now and then we share certain moments of like recognizing, but we go about the path differently.
But you both recognize that relationship has that spiritual practice element.
Yes and no. I would say I like it is definitely one of my main practices, but it is not necessarily like a main focus of her. And in the past I always resisted that. It was actually a big learning thing for me, where it's like learning to see her as she is and not needing her to be different, not needing her to be on the path, not needing her to change, not needing her to believe the same things I believe or recognize the truths that I'm exploring, and letting her journey be her journey.
Mm.
For a little while I did try to control that, and had an attachment to like, also practice this with me, but like that itself was a very revealing thing for me, where I had to let that go and like be open to a relationship where that may never happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
But actually, I found that to be very fulfilling, where it's like it's easy to love someone who does believe the same things as you and who agrees with all the things you're and does the things you're doing. But it's like it has been a next level learning curve for me, where it's like oftentimes we totally do not agree on what reality is, what God is, right? And it's like we both may feel, oh, I know the truth, but it's like that's where you have to let go of your own pride, because ultimately you shouldn't need anybody, especially your partners or your parents or your loved ones, to like agree with you, to approve of what you believe in, right? So it's like the willingness, even like where we're so closely walking this path of life together, it's like at the same time it's still individual path, and we have our own journeys.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
Yeah.
Right. Let's get back to meditation and self-inquiry then. So you spoke about sitting in silence, and
Yes.
I've done many meditations, and being wired the way I am, I can quite easily bounce around from different thing to different thing. I think, as I said, I tried Vedic meditation. So having a mantra, I found that I was pushing a bit too hard, because I think you can have an expectation that something's going to happen. And then, so I tend to come back to uh, mindfulness of breath, just to settle things down, often in my belly, because it's quite far from my head, to settle things down, or a sort of body scan based practice. And
Yes.
then once things are calm, or towards the end of a meditation, let's say, that's when I will tend to drop in a self inquiry question. Now, the classic self inquiry question, as outlined by Ramana, is who am I? And I spoke to Gary Weber. Do you know Gary Weber? Are you familiar with Gary?
No, I'm not familiar.
Okay, it's a great book, Happiness Beyond Thought. And he is a huge self inquiry advocate. And he says he basically did it along with yoga for just hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And then one day came out of a yoga pose, and the chatter in his head it's just complete quiet. And he had to go to work, and he was worried, but actually he was more effective at work. And so, speaking to him and reading his book really sort of added a bit of fuel to the fire for me of self-inquiry. So that's my practice. And the two questions that I find to be the most impactful for me are when am I, and to feel into that, because as soon as an answer comes up of I'm now, well then you've missed it. It's so immediate as to be outside of time, you could say, or indeed where am I, which then I'm sort of scanning round and um, it's impossible to find. And just to caveat this with, sometimes the mind can be a bit like, okay, what's going to happen or whatever. But those are my practices, and I do find that when I do those self-inquiry questions, once things are stiller for me, because I have got a busy mind, once things are stiller, it's subtle. It's not like fireworks, but it is peaceful, and it is a nice reminder that it's what the mind appears in, not the mind. So
Right.
that's where I tend to go to. I get the
Beautiful.
sense you probably a little bit more. I don't know, maybe do a bit more. But would you mind sharing, what meditation you have done, and also what your practice looks like now?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love talking about meditation. My favorite subject, clearly. But so initially, my journey started with very basic guided meditation, right? And it was all about, because my spiritual journey started with like a health problem.
Yeah,
So it was all in the beginning. It was all about just fixing my health. So I remember I discovered this meditation of like physical well being. So it's just basically affirmations of physical well being. So I remember when I had just started, right? I'm sharing this story for any beginner who doesn't have a sit down practice, to let you know that it will be hard in the beginning, right? Like I remember when I used to try to sit, I could not even sit and hold my body still for 5 minutes. That's also when I started to realize that, like, okay, that's a problem. I shouldn't be this restless when I'm actually trying to do something that like I'm creating an intention to sit for a little bit, right? So I should be able to, like, if I'm saying that I'm in control of my life and I want to create my life, or I want life to go well, I want to be happy, like I should be able to hold my body still for a little bit, right? Because then at that point I was in an empowerment phase, so I was all about like I want to create my life. But I'm like, if I can't even hold my body still for like 5 minutes, and what control do I really have over anything? So yeah, it was in the beginning. It was just about like physical well-being. So it would just be affirmations, and I'm just sitting and like listening to them. Little by little, I started to feel that like words were getting in the way of my actual practice of just being present. So I let go of those guided meditations, and I would just sit. I would maybe play some meditation music, and I would just that at that point I just started focusing on the breath and body sensation.
where would you focus on the breath?
Just right here, just watching the breathing.
But coming in and out of your nose, your mouth,
Yes, nose,
right?
nose.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
mainly nose. But the breath was always hard for me, and I never really enjoyed it. I started enjoying my practice when the pointer of body sensation really came into my experience. So after a few months of doing the guidance and the breathing one, I was still very restless. Didn't feel like I made any progress really, but something just kept me practicing, right? Like I didn't feel like I was making progress, yet something felt like, okay, this is the way. Just keep doing it. Something at least felt a little peaceful. So, but yeah, I felt totally all over the place, couldn't focus at all, barely could stay still for 15 minutes, but I just kept with it. And then the pointer of body sensation came, where it was like, just learn to watch the body sensation being there, right? That was the first time I actually felt body sensation consciously, because I was otherwise you only know the body through labels, arm, feet, legs. But it was like the pointer came into my experience that without moving your body or touching your body or creating an image of your body in the mind, how do you know the body is there? That very directly like showed me, oh wow, there's a whole field of sensation. That was the first time meditation actually became a little fun for me, where I was like, I felt it a lot easier, simpler to anchor my attention in body sensation
Hmm.
than in my breath. That's
Sunny,
where,
can I just
yeah,
quickly jump in? I just want to just clarify something. This is similar to me actually. When I was on holiday just recently, I was just sat on the beach. I didn't take a book, didn't take my phone, nothing. and was just staying in body sensation, would you tend to um, like focus on particular points, or would you stay with it in its totality? Might you start, for example, in your toe and move your way up in terms of a classic body scan? Can you just get a bit technical in terms
Yeah.
of that?
Um, I wouldn't necessarily focus on any particular point. The hands were always very easy because I do feel there's a lot of sensation in the hands. So in the beginning, it was much easier to dial in on the hand sensation rather than anywhere else. But I wouldn't move it like strategically with intention. It would just like whichever part of the body I can feel. As long as I felt that like I wasn't thinking about life and thinking about body sensation, and I was actually just feeling body sensation, paying attention to body sensation, then it doesn't matter whether it's moving around the body or it's anchored in one place, or even if it was alternating with like attention on breath, attention on sensation, feeling both, watching both together. As long as I was empty of thinking about who I am and like, or even body sensation, that was good. So even every now and then because I no longer really practice body sensation meditation, but sometimes just to anchor myself, I will. And when I do, it's like, that's the main thing. It doesn't matter what body part, as long as you're really feeling into it, as long as I'm just paying attention to it without judgment, without description, without label,
Mm.
it is fine.
So that's sorry again, the classic Eckhart Tolle thing, just feeling the inner energy field of the
Right.
body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just bringing your attention there, resting
Yeah,
your attention and awareness there.
exactly. But yeah, because the meditation we do on the level of attention, right? It's not done on the level of thought. It's not a thinking about breath. It's not a thinking
No.
about body sensation. It is a paying attention too. So actually, this is the first time where we are able to even tell the difference between attention and thinking. Thinking, which happens in the form of words and images, and attention, which is a wordless seeing, subtler than prior to the thinking. Even the thinking is something we are paying attention to. So meditation is simply, doesn't matter what style you practice. Well, I guess mantra would be different because you're sort of repeating. You are working at the level of words, but it's like any direct experience practice it works at the level of attention. Let's say the body sensation meditation. You're taking attention away from the field of thought and you're just anchoring it into body sensation. You're watching body sensation without words. That was a big revelation for me when I had started practicing, like discovering this seeing, knowing, attention that is free of language, labels.
Mm.
We're learning to experience life as it is rather than through our conditioned ideas about what it is, through filtering it through language. That alone it's so freeing, especially initially. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, for anyone who's has a problem with overthinking, I often will say to them, just bringing your attention into the body is one of the easiest ways to slow that down,
Yeah.
because we are so stuck in our heads because we're so sedentary. There's all the inputs, digital, everything like that, and actually as well, I would argue it's one of the easiest ways to stop feeling is to we learn to come up into our head and think rather
Right.
than feel. So
Mm-hmm.
anchoring our attention, as you've described, in the body in that way, just as you go about the day, if you feel like overthinking, it's a great way to slow that down.
I like that you said that it's thinking can very much be a form of avoidance
Hmm.
of feeling of facing what is. Oftentimes, so this is actually in the frequently asked section of the week one of my self inquiry course, because so there's a great emphasis in my work of whenever you find yourself in thought, let go, right? Return to yourself, return your attention to, doesn't matter what you're practicing, basically anchor your attention either in body sensation, I am, or whatever. Let go of thought. So the question always arises, but isn't this, aren't I running away from or avoiding reality? Um, am I not suppressing my thoughts? And I'm like, what are you actually suppressing? Ideas about what life is, right? Like we have a twisted idea that like thinking about life, thinking about my problems, thinking about what's happening is what is actually honoring it, taking care of it, handling it, facing it. But it's the opposite.
Yeah.
To me, thinking is an avoidance of reality,
Yeah.
right? It's going off into labels and descriptions about what reality is, rather than actually experiencing life as it is.
Yeah.
So meditation is really that. It's actually stepping out of this avoidance, which is a constant conceptual reality of which is all just ideas about reality, and really learning to face, feel, experience life as it is.
Yeah. That's such a good point. And just to add something on that, um, I think that's so interesting that people are so identified with the thoughts in their head that they feel like coming into the sensations of their body is an avoidance of reality. It sounds like, and I'm not a tribal person at all. Like I feel very fortunate to live in a country that's stable, etc. But I'm not a patriotic person. I'm not someone who I prefer someone from my country to another. It makes no difference to me, right? And part of the reason for that is because countries are concepts, right? There's no actual thing, America or UK, right? And I think seeing that, of course, it's helpful, in terms of navigating a social reality. But it's really important to see that they're just ideas that people have agreed upon. But I think what you've touched on there is really important because people lose sight of that and start to think the ideas about reality are more real than reality itself. And then that leads to things like us and them, to wars, to all these things. Because we are lost in a conceptual reality rather than in being in touch with reality as it is, it
Yeah,
causes so many problems, right?
exactly. It's the root of all dysfunction. Um, it's a dream within a dream within a dream. Like if you, let's say, like, the non-dual teachings tell us life as you know it is a dreamlike appearance, right? So let's say this is dream, just for the sake of this conversation. Then thinking is I think the world that thinking conceives, the ideas that thinking creates about who I am, what life is a dream within a dream.
Wow. Yeah.
And so the farther we go off into that conceptual realm, the farther we move from the truth of what is, the more painful it becomes, because the more false it will become. So the price we pay to venture off into concepts is suffering.
Hmm.
And that suffering is there. It's perfectly designed system, because suffering is then there as a mechanism that will drive you back to truth, which is
Yeah.
why most of our spiritual journeys start with suffering,
Yeah.
because ultimately suffering is what breaks down your pride about what you think you know. Suffering is ultimately what helps you recognize that what you believe is not true.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Yeah.
Meditation is the opposite. It's like venturing back to truth, away from concept. And that's why it feels peaceful as you really venture on this journey. That's why it feels more harmonious, authentic, creative, spontaneous, like all those things, because we're now becoming more and more grounded in the truth of what is.
Which brings us to self-inquiry,
Yeah.
because I was doing a coaching session yesterday, and I started. I work. I've mentioned this to you before. I work. I tend to work in terms of getting clear on what I would describe as the bullshitter in the head, and then understanding some of the patterns that have got laid down by the ego as a sort of safety mechanism, and then coming into the body and the wisdom and the intuition there. But then often I'll move into, for example, self-inquiry. And and so if you ask that question, like, who are you? Inevitably it really befuddles people. People really struggle to answer that. They might say, well, I'm a dad, I'm this, that, and the other. And but if you drop those concepts, then it leaves you with, okay, no, what is it? What is that I? What is that I that can hear these words now, that can see, that can feel, that can taste, that can touch. What is that? This experiencing element. So you've spoken about coming into that felt sense of the body, anchoring there, but you've said you've sort of dropped that away now. So how did your self-inquiry practice develop, and what does that look like?
Yeah. So, I was doing body sensation meditation for probably like maybe 2 years, 2.5 years. At this point, I was totally sold on meditation, meaning like I had felt that like it is a source of all peace, clarity, intuition, understanding, right? Like I started to realize that, yes, I read books and I learn and I practice, but it's like I felt that like um, meditation at a certain point, before I had encountered self inquiry, had become the foundation of my spiritual practice, where I would source clarity, right? Like, because a lot of answers you do not really think about or even read in books, meditation starts to reveal from within. So that was like a big thing for me, that like, okay, this is where the juice of the practice really is: meditation. Not just a sit down practice. The sit down practice, of course, is the foundation, but also like being present throughout the day. It is in silence that through silence that answers flow. Then that's when I told you that the teachings of Ramana Maharshi came into my life. That was for the first time I became aware of being, right? I am. That recognition that there is awareness. I know. That was a very big thing for me, because I was like, wow, there's experience appearing. It's pretty crazy, like, because we're just so lost in experience, we don't even recognize the fact that there's awareness of experience, that experience is appearing at all. That was my intro to I am. And when I encountered the teachings of self-inquiry, that was like what it pointed to. Hey, there's this I, there's this self that has never changed. So I just fell in love with that, because it became the biggest point of curiosity for me. Because I told you I had gone through that physical injury, and I had gone through years of pain and suffering, and for those few years, like the body was like totally different. My mental state, my belief system, my ideas of who I am, like completely different, right? And then as I started to embark on this personal development and healing journey and spiritual journey, vast changes in the body. Like I was practically experiencing a whole new body, a whole new worldview, a whole new belief system, a whole new outlook on life. So when the teaching of self-inquiry came to me and said that, like, but the self hasn't changed, the I-ness, that which sees these changes, has not changed. Oh, it became the biggest point of curiosity for me, where I saw that like it was clear to me, because there had been such drastic changes in such a short amount of time. I was like, hey, this body is not the same body as that was appearing before. This world and the lens through which I'm seeing, it's like all different. Yet I am the same self. So that was one of the biggest, like, it wasn't like a big moment, but like it was like a sort of a gradual, like big, like recognition that made me fall in love with this practice. So from then onwards, my practice all became about like focusing on the I. That's how my self-inquiry practice started, just focusing on the I. I wouldn't even necessarily ask myself any question like who am I or whatever. It's just like focusing on this felt sense of existence, this felt sense of self that is unchanging. Experiences change, what I do, um, what I like, what I appear to be on the bodily level, how, like, all thoughts, all feelings, everything is changing. But it's like this felt sense of self, I am, this knowing, being, it's the same in everything, every experience. So that just became my main focus, like constantly bringing attention away from thoughts, away from things, to that. Practice is essentially the same now, but of course it has evolved in a certain way. Do you want me to cover that, or do you want to?
Yes, let me just ask a quick question. So we spoke about rooting in the body, the sensations of the body, and that can be a felt sense of being on one level. However, obviously there's that sense of I am, and I think maybe it's just me. I feel like I am can get a little confusing, And I like that you said I rather than I am, because, okay, what does that point to? But at the same time, and I've still sometimes noticed this in when I do self-inquiry, it can still be a little heady because of that um, habit we have of feeling often located somewhere behind the eyes,
Yeah.
looking out, and there's that slight pressure, let's say, around the prefrontal cortex area. And so how have you, what's been your experience with that, and how to stop that, I as a referent to whatever it's pointing to, stopping that
Yes.
from being heady?
Yeah. Well, you're right. It totally feels personal, and it feels like I, this person, am, or like that I is in the head, I is in the body. But this is where we have to bring our faculty of discernment, right?
Mm.
Because what is being referred to as I is the unchanging self. We are now discerning that from everything that changes. So if anything that we perceive that changes, it cannot be I. So that's where I started to discern between the body sensation and I. Of course, I feels like it's in the body, but it's like, so am I aware from body sensation, or am I aware of body sensation? Right? That was a very easy way for me to do it. It's like naturally places you in a subtler place from where body sensation is being perceived as a gross object. Right? Like the eyes see objects outside of it, like at a more dense, gross level. Eyes are prior to it. Mind thinks at a level subtler than the eyes. Like the eyes cannot see thoughts. Thoughts can see the eyes. Similarly, thoughts cannot know self. Like I know thoughts. Same with the body sensation. It's like body sensation does not know me. I know the body sensation. I'm not aware as body sensation. If I resort to my direct experience without any story, without any thought, I'm not aware as body sensation. I'm aware of body sensation. I'm not aware from body sensation. I am aware of body sensation. Even these feeling like I am in the head. It's not really I is in the head. It's just four of the five senses are in the head, right? Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting. Touch is here, but touch is throughout the body. So there's a lot of sense perceiving going on here, and the process of thinking. So those things are here. Am I aware from them, or am I aware of them? Am I aware from head sensation, or am I aware of head sensation also as a changeful object, as a perceived object? So this starts to help us to recognize the formlessness of I. It helps us to see the unlocatable nature of I, that it's not in any particular point in space. Just like the room we're sitting in right now, all these objects are located. This desk is like head sensation. This computer is like a feeling or a thought, and they are in the space. I can point to these objects. I cannot really point to the space. Or in other words, like I can point to the space, but anywhere I point, the space is there.
Yeah.
Similar to when in our experience, like being aware or I is not at any particular point, but anywhere we look, it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But that was the
Which is,
discernment, just
yeah.
between what changes and what doesn't. And whatever I is always prior to, subtler than the object perceived. And that
Yeah.
object is always perceived as a transient thing, or as a changeful thing in my seeing, in the seeing of that which never changes.
Yeah. Which is why I enjoy particularly Where Am I? Because you can start to explore, and as you say, it's unpindownable. But
Yes.
then people talk about, resting as the self or staying in the self, which can sound a little counterintuitive when we're saying it can't be found. So how to marry those two paradoxes?
Part of it is like not worrying too much about being too obsessed with like marrying the paradox, right? On a practical component, we just have to constantly, quote unquote, return to it. So whenever you find yourself, when you're seeing is outward, let's say in thoughts or in sense perception or whatever, And it's mainly just with thought, right? Like, because thought is that which captures our attention and holds the beingness hostage the most in its concepts. So it's mainly with thoughts like this discernment. Everything else is fairly easy because it's not telling a story. Thoughts are telling a story. It's very compelling and it's all about me and my life. So that's why it holds the attention hostage. So it's mainly about like whenever we find ourselves thinking, the moment that remembrance comes, hey, that I was lost in thought, let go and return your attention back to your felt sense of being, I. I even say, like, don't worry so much about if it feels personal or not, if it feels like in the head or not. Wherever you feel I is, just go to that. As long as we make it a habit of really paying attention to I, not thinking about I, not worrying about body sensation, head sensation, it's just constant attention to I. Little by little, all concepts will melt in that awareness of I, awareness of being. And so, yes, one side of it is just constant returning to that, meaning remembering that. And the other side, as we start to keep returning to it, we start seeing the ever present nature of it. We see that it never goes. I never really, it never disappears, but my seeing does get caught up in appearances, things which come and go. So this is not about like maintaining the self that I am or creating it or becoming it, holding on to it. It appears like that from the personal point of view. It's actually just a practice of noticing myself as I really am.
Mm.
So here, awareness of self, so when you are aware that you are, when I'm aware of I, when I'm aware that I am aware, I am being the self that is.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you said remembrance. In that moment of letting go, as soon as you recognize that you are caught, let's say, in a story created by the mind, in that letting go, that is coming back to it.
You could do it either way. Either you can just return your attention to a sense of I and the story automatically gets dropped. Or if it's available in your practice, just simply drop thought and all that's left is you being that presence, which is ever present. So you
Yeah.
can take either avenue to it. Sometimes people say, I don't know how to just let go of thoughts. So then I give the other instruction, which is like, okay, bring your attention to right body sensation or sense of I. And
Yeah.
then spontaneously in doing so, thought is let go of. But if that's available in your practice, you just drop thought and then you're there as presence.
A really key point on my journey was I got introduced to, I was suffering from insomnia and I was looking for some answers, and I got introduced to acceptance and commitment therapy. And I had one session. This guy said, "There's the thinking mind." I was like, "Yeah, I'm very familiar with that." And he said, "Oh, and there's an observing mind." I was like, "Whoa!" And he gave me a diffusion technique, which is just, let's say I'd have the thought, "I'm not going to sleep tonight." I just would notice the thought and then add the prefix, "I'm having the thought that I'm not going to sleep tonight." And that was really sort of profound for me. And I don't use that personally now, but I do give that to people as a way,
Right.
a very sort of easy way, and also like a kind of there's an element of doing to it, which I think people often quite like, to do exactly what we've spoken about.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's ultimately you want to get rid of or let go of the I'm having the thought that, but it's quite a useful. It's like a pair of stabilizers to get
Yeah.
going.
Yeah. Ramana Maharshi often refers to the phrase, who am I or what am I? All these self inquiry pointers as, right, like the stick that stirs the burning pyre and then you throw that stick in the fire itself. It is really like that. In the beginning or even throughout our journey, like we may often need to, it's like through habit or through whatever, like through comfort, needing to resort to certain statements to bring us to that awareness of being, awareness of self. Sometimes it's just totally spontaneous. There's no phrase that's needed. And I think as our practice matures, yes, there's less and less a reliance on words to help us recognize what is prior to words. Self-remembrance, self-awareness, I think becomes more and more spontaneous, simple, obvious, not needing a talk or a, something in a book or even our own thinking to guide us to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ramana spoke about who am I? And Nisargadatta just said he just went straight there, right, to that experience of I am. So, how spontaneous is it in your experience now?
I still have a very formal sit down meditation practice. That's something that doesn't matter how much I feel I've matured in this. I will just, I look at that as my appointment with God every day. And I borrowed that from the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. And, I was inspired by him because him being such a realized master and like the way he expresses love of God, love of truth in day to day life, and not only in his work, but also in the way he conducts his spiritual practice, how disciplined he is with his meditation. I found that very inspiring. Like, who am I to think that, oh, I can just stop practice or whatever? Because, you see that in non dual space a lot, like,
Yeah,
oh, there's nothing to practice or whatever. But it's like, I love the component of it where it's like your whole life becomes like a love letter to God, and sit down meditation is a part of that. Of course, like the day how we approach it and the work we do is like our form of devotion and worship to God, self, life. But also then like the meditation practice are those windows where we completely withdraw from experience, from being a person, and melt in the presence of God, within presence of self. Sorry, whoever doesn't like the word God.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So yeah, I have a formal practice where every morning and evening before I begin work, I practice meditation. After I finish work in the evening, I practice meditation. If my wife is willing in the evening, I'll meditate with her. She's about to have a baby soon in the winter, so she's like, I need to practice some meditation to like learn how to be calm. So I've been enjoying that with her. But then throughout the day, I feel I don't like strain myself to like try to remember. I feel like when I'm just totally free and relaxed, the remembrance arises often. Let's say like throughout the talk, it arises spontaneously. It's just awareness of being, right? Um, when I do find myself lost, and the moment I notice that, same practice doesn't change. It's not like we have to do a million things. The moment I noticed I was just thinking, especially if it was like psychological chatter about like future and all that personal nonsense, instantly drop and just check in with being. Just
yeah,
be that which is.
yeah, yeah. So, how long do you sit for? And do you, just to get a bit techie here, how long do you sit for? And again, do you go straight to that, or do you tend to start by rooting yourself in the body to settle things down? Like, as I mentioned, for me, I find that
Right.
sort of a focus helps settle things down to then be able to go there more
Yeah.
easily. I find that works for me.
I think every day looks different. And I think that's something I would invite everybody to be open to when you are starting this meditation journey, especially if you're new. Um, Allow your meditation sessions to be different day to day, and get rid of your idea of successful or not successful sessions. I typically I don't time them like I used to when I started. To anybody that starts, I say like try your best to implement 2 sessions of 15 minutes per day, morning and evening. um, that's what I used to do. And then it sort of matured into like 20-minute sessions, but I would still time it. Now for many years I have not timed it. I just usually ends up being around like 20 to 40 minutes per session. And I only know that because every now and then I'll play like I'll use these like theta waves that just like playing to block out like downstairs noise. Um, and so I'll see like how much time has passed. But otherwise, I don't really worry too much about time. It's just whenever it feels natural to just open your eyes, you do so. And so when I sit, I don't, for the first few minutes, I actually just don't even try to practice anything. I just sit and be quiet. Some days, of course, is more restless. Some days is just naturally melt into awareness of being. Other times, when there is a certain momentum to the mind, my greatest practice is like allow me and my life to not matter for the moment.
Nice.
Because
I
all
like
this
that.
restlessness is about who I think I am and what is going on in life and what I want and what I don't want. So it's like
Mm.
I try to, especially when feeling restless or active, because there's a lot of things to do in the day or whatever. I just try to melt away from self-importance. What I like doesn't matter. Who I am doesn't matter. My family doesn't matter. My hobbies, my spiritual desire, what I want from this session. I let go of all my needs, wants, resistances. It's like you're offering yourself up to God. It's like you're taking this entire personal costume off. And I find that the restlessness naturally may take some time, but it gradually just melts away because it needs the fuel of your importance, of your personal concept and the life you think you're thinking about. So the moment we allow ourselves and the life we're thinking about and everything we care, like our family, our goals, to not matter, there's no food for the mind. It starts to just turn inward by itself.
Lovely. And has just to finish, has the texture of it changed? Because the self, capital S, is the same. I mean, I think of on having no head, for example, coming back to that experience, it's the same. But has your flavor of it, has the texture of it changed at all for you? Perhaps even in its closeness or something?
Yeah, difficult to talk about that. But a simple way of saying it is like it has matured. The practice has ripened greatly. And it's like maturing into some certain subtler pointers that I myself also do not fully grasp yet. Like there are certain teachings in the later, like the final teachings of Nisargadatta Maharaj, where he's pointing to what is prior to beingness, prior to I am, right? That in which both the subject and object arise. So I feel like my practice is gradually maturing into that and becoming clear in that aspect of pure awareness prior to even I am. And I'm exploring that in my practice. I don't talk too much about it yet. I feel like not fully like there yet. So, but yeah, that's what I feel like I dabble with. But other than that, I do feel that most of the time, the main simple practice is awareness of being aware. I find that sometimes when you try to make it into something more advanced or something subtler, like it can get away from you. Whereas like the main practice remains the main practice. And I do keep going back to that when I visit the teachings of Ramana, Nisargadatta, or any other teacher. The main pointer is I am. Keep that, because from the personal point of view, from this point of view of waking experience, that is really the main thing to be done. That is the main cleanser, the purifier, the revealer of truth. It is the door to the unknown. So sometimes, yeah, I feel myself trying to go to the unknown, but it's like whenever that becomes a little too spacey, it's just like returning to awareness of being aware. In that awareness of being aware, you are the self, right? Because what is aware of being aware? Self knows. That which is prior to beingness knows that it is. So in that, there's no personality, there's no notion of who you are, what life is, what you want to achieve spiritually. It's total absence. It's simply like being aware.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, I do want to add one more thing, which I think you mentioned about how in some non-dual circles there's practice is pointless, for example. And I think for me, where I'm at with it is being aware of being aware. So noticing what it is that's aware of my thoughts, my sights, perceptions, feelings, etc., and the ever-present nature of it, and the fact that it's always on and it has no qualities.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it's very clear. I don't want to say absolutely because I don't want to be dogmatic, but it's I would certainly lay my hat on it, right? It has to therefore be the same in me as it is in you, as it is in anyone else, because it doesn't have any qualities other than being aware. So how could it be any different? And it's the personality and the body and the mind that are different. And so the implication then of that is, for me, a really important part in terms of how you live, which
Yeah.
is a recognition then that, okay, if I hurt you at a deepest level, I'm hurting myself.
Yeah.
And I think this is what I try and sort of get across, is that I feel like it naturally leads to more loving behavior. Now, by loving
Absolutely.
behavior, I don't mean, oh, lovey-dovey in that sense, or it can be that. It could be boundaries. Because, for example, working with some people, it can seem like people pleasing is loving behavior, but actually that is not loving behavior. That's
Yeah.
self-sacrificing behavior. So I think getting clear on what loving behavior is, like, love can be tough, but to be loving, for me, that speaks to things like integrity, that speaks to things like responsibility, um, trying to recognize the patterns we have and work with them. That to me is the human side of this.
Yes.
Um, and but yes, that I think is a really beautiful thing. Forgetting deep realization or losing yourself in awakening enlightenment, but it's just, once for me I've recognized that, then living in accordance with that to the best of my ability, and of course I still mess up regularly, but to the best of my ability, that to me is, I think, the most beautiful part of, or one of the most important parts of this recognition, is recognizing that deep oneness, sameness
Yeah. Yeah.
of us all, and trying to live in accordance with that.
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, that's what ultimately the spiritual practice should flower within your our experience, right? Like the total embodiment of the truth we are beginning to realize beyond appearances. And I, as you said, loving behavior for me is just a behavior that is reflecting of the truth that you are coming to realize beyond all doubt. And so I really feel that, like, if we are, I hear all this talk about spiritual bypassing and stuff, and I'm like, as long as you are honest with yourself and you're not in just on this journey for like the sake of like personal benefit, or like if you're really honest and you're really genuine in your search, I think that you don't have to worry about spiritual bypassing, because like you won't allow yourself, like, because it's like, in a way, like it's sort of like a lying to yourself, and I think if we're really honest, we're really curious about the truth, that if we really walk the path and we strive to our best to practice, we really live these teachings. And I think that's ultimately even greater than recognizing some metaphysical truth. That's what I actually love about the teachings of a religion called Sikhism. It's not necessarily about achieving any metaphysical truth. It's all about like living a righteous, pure life that is like really established in the understanding. And I think that is equally as, that's what I feel awakening looks like on a day-to-day level, through the filters of time and space, like just living a righteous and authentic life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Trying to align ourselves with this
Yeah.
to the best of our ability. I am going to slightly disagree with you though, Sonny, in terms of the
Bypassing.
bypassing thing, because I speak to a few people who've come to me through some of my videos, and I've noticed this, and I think this was probably true for myself as well, in that I feel that some people see non-duality, awareness of awareness, awakening, really as the ultimate avoidance, the ultimate way to avoid some of the messiness of being human.
Hmm.
And I do think it is a real thing. And you said if we're honest with ourselves, but I think the truth is the easiest person to fool is yourself. And so I see that, and I think where this became quite clear to me in the last few years has been putting certain people slash teachers on pedestals and thinking, wow, they're this realized being. And then perhaps seeing a little bit behind the curtain and realizing, no, perhaps, the perception is not quite in alignment
Right.
with the reality. And I don't think that that's necessarily happening maliciously. Again, I think there's an element of self delusion there. So,
Hmm.
so I'm not disagreeing entirely with you, but well, maybe I am a little bit. it just in terms of I think we do have to be a bit careful to, like, it's like what we spoke about, right? Like immersing yourself in relationship and trying
Yeah.
to show up to the best of our ability. But also, I think, the you know, our feelings and our wounds and our patterns and that kind of thing. I think that work, shadow work, you can call it, is really important. And I do see some people, I think, using this as a way to try and avoid that.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that perspective. And I totally appreciate that. Like, I found in my journey, that like, as long as I stayed very, like, just genuine, and as long as I tried my best to embody these teachings and practice them on a day-to-day basis and the best that I knew how at that moment, even though,
Mm.
like, let's say I look back and I'm like, oh, my perspective, my understanding at that time was very limited in this way. But as I found that, like, as long as I just kept showing up to the practice, and truth is what I cared for more than things, um, then I felt like even if it was like if I practiced wrongly for some time, or let's say I practiced some bypassing, or I got caught up in a phase of nihilism or whatever, then like that was like, first of all, the practice always eventually corrected itself, right? I fell out of balance, but then I found back balance just through consistency of practice. And then I also then noticed that it's like, hey, it was a sort of relevant phase for me to go through. It was a important part of my journey. So it's like, was I really ever off the path? So yeah, it's like, it's such a subtle topic, right? Because yeah,
Yes.
from the surface, yeah, you are right. Like, we shouldn't be doing that, like bypassing. And this teaching is not a excuse for dysfunctional behavior. Yet at the same time, if we do get caught up in it, like, that's sort of part of our destiny, and it's like sort of meant to be and
Yeah.
could not
Yeah.
be
That's
avoided.
very
And
true.
then ultimately, as long as you stay consistent, it also serves you. So yeah, it's a subtle topic. Like,
It
who knows
is, and
what's true?
there's that paradox, it's like absolute
Yeah.
relative and stuff like that. But I think that also brings me right back to the start, which is I do appreciate that you are speaking from where you're at. That's what I try and do too. I don't pretend that I'm the finished product, or that I don't have my wobbles, or those kind of things. But at the same time, this has really helped me, and I do see a lot of, oh, I'm there, and I appreciate that you're not like that. So I feel like that's brought us full circle.
Thank you. Yes. I also felt the same way that you did with certain teachers, where you look at these teachers and you feel like they're such evolved beings, and whatnot. So I feel like what this space needed is refreshing voices, that, I think it's just, let's just discuss the teaching and grow together
Yeah,
and have
yeah,
fun while doing it, because spiritual practice is a practice, but it's ultimately like our greatest interest in life and the most fulfilling thing we can do. Like, so let's enjoy that. Let's dive deep and share our experience. And I think what this whole non-dual space needs more and more is people practicing, rather than just dwelling in conceptual ideas about the truth and who I am. So I hope that this space reaches that balance more and more soon,
yes, yeah,
through more and
and
more
honestly,
voices.
and
Yes.
bringing it into everyday life, and into our feelings as well, from my point of view. But
Yeah. Totally agree.
Sunny, it's been a real pleasure. I've enjoyed the spontaneity and dance of our conversation. It's been really lovely meeting you. So thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Love the work you're doing and really enjoyed this interview. One of my favorites.